Right, on with the show. So, Clare is the consulting arm of MNC Saatchi, and as such, this crisis has had a pretty polarizing impact on our business. Some of our clients in FMCG, financial services and retail are actively working to manage spikes in demand and the associated brand experience issues that brings. Others in airlines, restaurants or automotive are conserving cash reserves and beginning to think about how their business can move fully into a what's next mindset. So the impact of COVID-19 is being felt differently in every sector, every country, and in every business. And it's clear that's meant that we have had to be even better at listening to the needs of our clients and their customers. And increasingly, we're working to help light the path to what comes next, the bounce, and then hopefully the longer recovery. And that for us means staying true to our purpose, to what we were founded to do, which is bring clarity to complex decision-making and to unlock pathways to growth. To help do that for as many people and brands as we can, we've launched these Clear Conversations, an ongoing global webinar series where we discuss key strategic issues for brands, strategists, marketers, experienced professionals, and innovators. Each conversation is designed to be useful, specific, and to add some clarity to the often confusing world we're operating in right now. Now, we've all seen the piano track-backed ads featuring unprecedented use of the word unprecedented, and emails reassuring us that brands of all shapes and sizes are all in this with us together. So today, I'm delighted to be joined by a superb panel to discuss the enormously tricky challenge of how brands can balance trust, distinctiveness, and purpose in a crisis. From Japan, Akira Mitsumasu, who is VP of Global Marketing for Japan Airlines. Akira has over 30 years of experience in the aviation industry and has held multiple leadership roles within the company, including his most recent role as VP of Products and Services Planning. Akira has been named one of Asia's best marketers and is recognized as one of the 50 most influential global marketing leaders. He currently serves as an advisory board member on the CMO Council for Asia Pacific, as well as a member on the APEX, Airline Passenger Experience Association Board of Directors. From Singapore, we're joined by Sulin Lau, who heads up marketing across ASEAN for Singapore's biggest unicorn, Grab. Sulin led strategy teams at BBDO and DDB before going client-side to head up marketing for Malaysian telco Maxis. Under her stewardship, Maxis was named FE Brand of the Year 3 consecutive years in a row and ranked #1 effective advertiser in APAC in 2017. She left marketing briefly to lead Facebook's agency partnership team, but joined Grab in March this year to lead the super apps marketing teams across 6 countries. From Ireland, we're joined by Adam Murphy, who is head of brands in the global brand development team for Ornua. Ornua is Ireland's leading exporter of dairy products and the owner of Ireland's first and only billion-euro food brand, Kerrygold. Adam is a commercially focused marketer who's worked on premium national icon brands like Jameson, Grolsch, and Kerrygold, both internationally and in domestic markets. From the East Coast of the US, we're joined by Karen Schnelwar, who's the VP of Global Brand Strategy and Marketing at OXO, the consumer products company known for establishing a thoughtful, design-driven home goods paradigm. Prior to OXO, she spent 20 years in the branding world, most recently as head of strategy at boutique and network brand consultancies, working to define brands and portfolios across categories. Karen has worked with iconic and disruptive global brands such as American Eagle Outfitters, Driscoll's, The Wall Street Journal, Taylor Swift, and Clare. She has a passion for mining insights, building brands, and bringing them to life. And finally, from Clare MNC Saatchi, Damian Symons. Damian is the CEO of Clare and is responsible for our 7 offices worldwide. During his 12 years with the business, he's consulted with a number of clients, helping to shape their brand and corporate narrative to better engage with diverse stakeholders. Recent client examples include the Walt Disney Corporation and the Prudential. Damian also sits on the executive committee of the MNC Saatchi Group, where he advises on the future strategy and direction of the business. And with that, Damian has put together a short presentation to set up the discussion. So I'll now hand over to him to get us going.
Thank you very much, Geraint. I'm just going to kick off the session and just introduce this thorny subject and this sort of moment of debate around how you balance trust, distinctiveness, and purpose in a crisis. Literally just 5-10 minutes just to give a few provocations before we flip into the panel. COVID-19, it's a new thing. It doesn't feel like it's a new thing. It feels like it's been with us for some time, but it hasn't. It's literally been, for most of us at least, it's literally been around 8 weeks of lockdown. But although it feels like it's been here for a long time, what has really been here for a long time is the idea of purpose. And purpose is really, really key to how organizations navigate quite complex and challenging times of crisis like we have at the moment. It's important to colleagues. Around 75% of colleagues want their CEOs to discuss how their company benefits society, but it's important to the customer and consumers as well. So just a source from Accenture is 62% of consumers want a brand to have a clear take on current issues for society. That said, although purpose has been around for a long, long time, it's now more than ever that decisions brand makes for employees, customers, and shareholders really, really are under the spotlight. And just to give a quote that I think really expresses that well, we've got a quote here from the ex-CEO of Best Buy. This is a time when performance is not defined by a company's share price. This is a time when performance will be judged by how a company and its leadership serve everyone to fulfill a higher purpose. It's a clear statement, it all makes sense, but it's also problematic. And it's problematic because of the word everyone. Many businesses throughout the lands at the moment are operating in extremely distressed situations. And the idea that leadership can serve everyone without compromise is a really, really big statement and not necessarily realistic. There are tough choices that are needing to be made by leadership up and down the country. Examples of the sort of multiple tensions that leadership have to navigate through the crisis are, do we pivot and do we adapt, or do we hold firm in the face of others changing around us? There's a real pressure at the moment for businesses to change what they're doing, change what they're saying, evolve the corporate narrative in response to the crisis. But actually, there's also a pressure for businesses to remember why they're really here and to remember their purpose and to hold firm and to be consistent. And this is one of the things that generates trust. Another tension that exists is whether big business should help now, or should big business actually plan interventions later on when the impact might be greater. Again, there's a real pressure and an expectation for big business to respond right now, but at the same time, it actually might be more effective if businesses plan in the long term. While COVID-19 is a crisis that is more or less at its peak in most of the countries that we see right now, it's also true that the impact, certainly the financial impacts of COVID-19, is going to be felt for a long time. So how do organisations start to plan for the long term as well as respond to the short term? Another tension that exists is how long do we continue to prioritise our people over our profits? This is a really, really tricky one. There are many financially distressed businesses at the moment, and generally most organisations have behaved admirably to protect jobs, to take actions that protect the business in the long term. However, how long can that continue? There's a real tension that business leaders need to navigate. At what point in time do they need to face into some really difficult decisions around people and start to think about the longevity of the organisation when it comes to profits? The next tension I just wanted to outline, which I think is a really interesting one, is how far does our responsibility for safety extend backwards and forwards throughout the value chain? I think most businesses have behaved admirably with regard to their colleagues and their direct employees, but there's a bigger question. To what extent does their responsibilities extend beyond that? Do they have a duty of care to all of the suppliers that exist in the value chain that surround the organisation? So while we have to acknowledge it's not easy, it's not perhaps a surprise that there are some businesses and some brands that are perhaps getting it wrong. There's three examples that exist that are on this slide. The first is Sports Direct. And Sports Direct is a major global sports retailer in the UK. They have a tension that they're trying to navigate. The tension that they're trying to navigate is how do they deliver to stakeholders at the same time as how do they protect employees? I think it's fair to say that they got it wrong. They tried to stay open at a time when everybody else was closing in the pursuit of shareholder returns. So that's one example. The other example here is EasyJet. I think everyone would have great sympathy for the airline industry. It's been hit absolutely hard. So I don't think anyone would be particularly surprised that EasyJet received a government loan and grant of around 600 million. I think what people would be surprised at is that 3 days before, EasyJet also paid out a dividend of £170 million. So in this case, the choices that EasyJet have made are probably on the wrong side of fulfilling their basic obligations in terms of the social contract with the government and the public at large versus delivering to shareholders. And then the final example that I've got in this slide is Telstra. So this is an Australian giant telco that exists out there. And when the lockdown first happened, on the one hand, they asked customers to moderate their data usage and reduce their data usage so there was enough data for everyone. But then on the other hand, they tried to play both sides of the coin. So what Telstra did was also tried to sell additional sort of data packages and data bundles to be able to drive their revenue line. So in this case, they prioritise shareholders over their actual customers. So it's tricky, we need to acknowledge that, but we also need to take note that some brands are really getting it wrong, and it really is hitting the press in a big way. Having said that, some brands, maybe you could argue, are going too far the other way. So what we can see is brands making an overt effort to do good, to be empathetic, but they are really, really struggling to cut through. I think, like everyone, probably everyone was the same as me, and at the moment lockdown happened, you probably received many, many emails from suppliers telling you and informing you and reassuring you that they were here for you. That was then quite quickly followed by a huge volume of advertising above the line that said exactly the same thing, whether it's the General Motors Corporation, Indeed, Target or Aldi. They're all indicating that they're here to help. They're all here for us. They're all supportive. They're all empathetic. They also talk about a couple of other common themes as well, around that they're big, that they've got a history and heritage, that they've been around for 100 and 150 years, whatever it might be. The problem with this is, while I think it's well motivated, it's not different, it's not distinctive, and it's not cutting through. So this leads us on to some choices that brand owners have to make. 3 choices really, and they're fairly clear. The first one, just keep going as you are. Just keep, turning the wheels of capitalism and trying to generate as much profit as you can. Do something bad, it's going to be damaging, but it doesn't really matter, because what you're doing is prioritizing shareholder returns, because that's the way it works. The point I think we've seen is that it's going to get picked up, it's going to be noticed, and in this case, any purpose that the organization has isn't being used to guide critical decision making. The next choice, do something good. This is expected. So plow resources, energy, and effort into CSR activity. I think it is important, but it is expected, and it's not cutting through. If you're a big business, I think people would expect you to be having a very active CSR program at the moment. And then the final one is, how do you do something distinctive? So how do you create a unique set of actions and initiatives that do good, but also reinforce your purpose, your brand, and your strategy? Actions that are distinctive and unique to you. That's the opportunity for business, and while we have to acknowledge the tensions, and we know it's not easy, that's the challenge that we need to get to. So despite all of these challenges, there are some brands getting the balance absolutely right. There's 3 examples on this screen. I'll just talk through them really quickly. Morrison's, a big supermarket based in the UK, they pivoted their purpose to feeding the nation. They had a number and a range of activities that sat beneath this. Financial support for local suppliers, to partnering with Deliveroo to launch same-day home delivery for people in critical need. So these are all activities that sat under this big idea of feeding the nation. Their previous purpose was to make and provide food that we're all proud of, and that pivot that they made on their purpose is just a new take on that. It's the same idea at the heart of it that describes what they're about as an organisation. It's consistent, and it links way back to what Morrison's are known for and stand for in the eyes of customers, but importantly, in the eyes of their employees. And a lot of this activity, as you would imagine, is delivered by the employees, which makes it really real throughout the organisation. The other example here that I think is really interesting is Lego. Lego's purpose, which I think is a really, really great one, is to inspire and develop the builders of tomorrow. So what did they do? Again, this is about activity primarily and less about communication. They reconfigured manufacturing to make visors for healthcare workers. They donated 50 million towards relief efforts. Nothing particularly new or different in donating money for relief efforts. Lots of organisations have done that, but they focused it on a contribution to a charity, Cannot Wait, which provides education for children in crisis. So again, going back to the heart of the big idea that's behind the brand and behind the purpose that they've got. And they also repurposed Explained with Lego videos, which are generally used to promote the different product suites that they've got, and they repurpose them as a tool to support parents with homeschooling. So again, being very true to the purpose, using the purpose to inspire activity that is unique and is distinctive for that organisation. And the final example on here that we've got is Chipotle. They were consistent with their purpose, which was to cultivate a better world, which is a big, big purpose. But it started with their people. So they expanded emergency sick leave and sick pay for people affected by COVID-19. They had a provision and access to healthcare experts for employees that were suffering from symptoms related to COVID-19. For customers, they launched Zoom lunch hangouts to support people struggling with isolation and social distancing. So they have a big, big purpose that you'd expect to have a big, big impact on society, and they've looked at it very broadly across the different stakeholder groups. And all of these gestures that I've talked to are true to the brand, true to the purpose, and are distinctive as a consequence. You know, they're not vanilla messages that we've seen earlier in the presentation. They're really quite distinctive ideas and activities that led us straight back into that purpose. So what can we learn from them? There's probably 4 lessons that I think are really quite interesting. One is continuity. So how do you have a set of activities that really build on the brand strategy and strengths? You need to start with the heart of the purpose, the brand, the promise, the expectations that that sets, and think about the activities that that should inspire. The next one is about tangibility. So, and this is one of the key themes in this really short presentation that I'm sharing with you, is the focus on actions over communication is critical. I'm not for a moment suggesting that communication isn't important, but I think what is important are tangible actions that demonstrate the reality of your commitment to the purpose. Then I think it's quite right that that should be communicated. But I think where some organizations have made mistakes is they've communicated first, and then perhaps they've tried to work out the action plan later. The next one is about proactivity. So this is about taking the lead. This is about not waiting to be told. This is about not following the crowd. So very quickly, organizations need to think about their purpose. They need to make some of the key decisions, and they need to inspire actions. If it looks like you're just following the crowd and doing what everyone else does, again, it's unlikely to be distinctive. And the final one is about consistency. So this is really about inside out, making sure that the purpose is embedded throughout the organization so that all activity across different functions is really consistent with the idea of the purpose. So nothing unravels at all. So those are 4 kind of rules around how to build trust and distinctiveness through your purpose. And I just want to end on this slide before we flip over into the panel. So in the absence of certainty, and there's no question that we are in very uncertain times, purpose is critical for 2 reasons. One, it helps guide good decision making. It helps organizations make the right decisions. And I think that's really important. And when I showed the 3 examples where perhaps organizations hadn't made the right choices, that's probably because they didn't have their purpose front and center, and the purpose wasn't embedded in the way that it should have been. So that's the way to generate trust. Make the big decisions, and make the big decisions consistent with your purpose, and you can start to generate trust. Then there's this thorny issue around distinctiveness. And this is about inspiration, and this is about actions. It's distinctiveness that cuts through, and it's actions that people remember rather than words and rather than communication. So I'll just end just by reading out a quote from Microsoft's CEO. This is an extract from a letter that he wrote to all staff when COVID-19 first hit and staff went into lockdown. And I think it captures what we're talking about very well. It's in times of great disruption and uncertainty, our ability to stay grounded in our sense of purpose is of the utmost importance. Okay, so just a few thoughts around this sort of thorny issue and this tricky balance that organizations need to make around how they build trust and how they remain distinctive. And now I'm going to flip back to Geraint, and we are going to flip back into the panel.
Right, thank you, Damian. We're going to kick off with some questions for each of our panelists. We've actually been inundated with questions from the audience in advance, so thank you so much. What we've tried to do is go through them and pick out the bigger themes that you all wanted to hear about. And so we'll try to answer as many of those as we can. But if you do have a burning question that comes up during the process of the conversation, please ask it in that Q&A box below at the bottom of the screen, and I'll try to make time for as many as I can. And remember, please put the name of the panelist that you want to answer the question in front of your question when you ask it. So I'm just going to ask all of the panelists to come off mute if they haven't already. It looks like everyone now has. Super. So I think the first question really is the big one. And I'm going to come to you, Akira, because I'm feeling mean. Is it possible to be trusted and purpose-led and yet also distinctive, as Damian says, in the midst of a crisis like this one? And does that apply as a general rule to all categories, or is it more true and less true for certain categories in your mind?
Well, I think as Damian has very well described the tendency many brands tend to fall into in sounding good but not being distinctive. I think it is possible to balance that. But I just want to make several points on brands trying to be good. We are going through a global crisis. We all feel very disoriented. We all share the same experience. And ironically, this gives us a sense of unity. We are all in this. So it's only natural that we show empathy and compassion, and there is nothing wrong in that. And I think in a way, it's also very important that we build a shared norm of helping each other and sharing, instead of being selfish, defensive, or even uncivil. We have had cases in Japan of news of, for example, public shaming for people not wearing masks that ends up being fighting in streets because people are not following what the government has advised. So we do need some form of this shared sense of unity, and this is helpful, I think. But I think we can at the same time also be distinctive, not just in terms of salience, but also in terms of making a positive difference. And in order to do that, we have to, like what Damian mentioned earlier, we have to work out the benefit with a brand point of view. And all brands have a purpose. And I think increasingly this purpose goes beyond a transactional relationship to include who they are and what they represent. So when think of whether one should or shouldn't do certain things during a crisis, I think it depends very much on whether doing whatever they think is sensible, is relevant to their customers. And we see many cases of brands repurposing their activities with a brand point of view, like the example we had earlier on, Lego and the others. But there are also many brands who are currently really, well, much as they would like to do something of that sort, they are simply not capable of doing so because of limited resource, because of the difficult financial situation they are in, and hence they don't have the liberty or luxury to really repurpose themselves. So we as an airline, the COVID-19 is really devastating us. Japan Airlines, our purpose really is to bring people to places and allow people to fulfill their journey purpose. Hence, our brand statement is fly into tomorrow, or fly into a better tomorrow, is our purpose. But currently with borders closed and with flights cancelled, there's not much we can do, but we still endeavor to do or fulfill our purpose the best we can, such as by operating repatriation flights for people stranded overseas, and by using our cabin space to carry medical supplies to places in need. It's not a perfect answer to the situation, but I do agree that it does spring from the idea that we are conscious of our brand purpose, and hence this leads to a lot of actions that we can very easily or very quickly get our staff to work on.
Thank you, Akira. Adam, I'm going to come to you next, if I don't mind. Akira touched on this idea of repurposing, and I'm conscious it's something that you've looked into quite a lot with Kerrygold in Ireland, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And just building on Damian's points and Akira's points, I think there's some really insightful stuff in there about the nature of purpose. And for me, purpose needs to have meaning, and it needs to be genuine for consumers to accept it as authentic, and you can't fake it. And, like all the worthwhile things in life, it takes time to develop it and create it, and they're not stumbled upon. And I think in the examples that were shared, what a lot of brands seem to have done, they've done the connection relevancy stuff really, really well. But with the examples that Damian shared, we didn't see this distinctiveness or ownability. And I do wonder about the impact of those things, because personally, I don't think consumers are sitting at home with a list of brands that have or have not run COVID advertising and checking them off against a list. And in terms of our own position, I think I'd like to say it was all by design and all brilliantly thought out, but I think we're just quite fortuitous in Ireland because, with Kerrygold in Ireland, because our brand has quite an emotional connection to Irish consumers, and that's what's required, in the current environment to connect with meaning. And people remember our advertising going back 25, 30 years. And what we could see is, people were looking for greater connection, greater empathy, but connection to things from their past as well. So myself and my colleagues were quite lucky in that our predecessors from decades previous had the skill and wisdom to create something that people still value today, a brand that has an emotional purpose and appears to be resonating for that reason.
Thank you. Karen, I'm going to come to you next and talk a little bit about OXO. I mean, you operate in a lot of categories where actually a lot of the products are relatively indistinct, and OXO's famous for being distinct in its product design and its approach to the market. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you've managed this?
Oh, absolutely. And I'd love to just, yes, when you talk about the balance of purpose, trust, and distinctiveness, I was intrigued by the phrasing of the question because those seem so inextricably linked. I'm a strategist by trade, and I believe in like a very simplified brand strategy model, and purpose should always be built into positioning, and sort of your reason for being and what motivates you should always be front and center. And then if you define yourself in a way that's compelling, it's inherently unique, a unique point of view on the world. It is distinct. These are very unusual times that we're in. And so that positioning and purpose, inextricably linked, can be activated in a way that's right for now. So OXO is very fortunate right now in that we make things that people are using every day in their homes, ongoing, but especially right now. And so it's a very intense time. Our positioning and our purpose are like, we make the everyday better every single day. What's interesting about right now for us is that every day, the idea of the everyday has inherently changed. The idea of the place where our products are used, home, has changed. And so we are, you talk about trust, which is, table stakes for really being welcomed into someone's home and into someone's life. That needs to be there, and it's put to the test now more than ever, particularly when your tools are used more heavily than ever. People are confined to their homes. There's more reliance on what we make coming through for people. A lot of what we make is the branded entry in a given category, and we are the premium brand, we are the most expensive brand, but the way that we're designed with universal design principles, with rigorous consumer testing, with a lot of empathy, creates an outcome that's quite distinct and different than everyone else out there on a product level, which is why our positioning and purpose are able to be distinctive on a brand level. And what we found is people are experiencing our tools anew with a greater intensity every single day. And we hope we're able to help them out, not just with the roster that they have of our product across all of our categories, cooking and baking and cleaning, but that they're able to discover more things they might have that they might not have used as regularly. And if they need additional tools, we want to be there for them to help them. And I say that not through the lens of selling as much as helping, which has been a major reframe that we've had to go through in these last couple of weeks.
Thank you, Karen. That's really interesting. Sulin, I'll come to you because I think when we discussed this earlier in the week, you mentioned the sheer variety of services that Grab has and the sheer variety of customer base that you have in different markets. How are you managing this in very different ways across the suite of services that Grab delivers in Asia?
I think for purpose, right? I actually have a different view. I don't think that all companies should march forward with purpose first. If you weren't born with a purpose, it's very hard for a marketing person to kind of fake it, right? And if you have to fake a purpose, it's almost more important that you don't lead with purpose, that you lead with extremely good utility, like best bar none utility. For Grab, as the story I related to you when we first chatted, right, was it was born in a classroom at a business school classroom called Building Wealth at the Bottom of the Pyramid. And so the entire business, it's only 8 years old, but the entire business is really about solving frictions and problems in a part of the world where there's 670 million people and many problems that need to be solved. And so Grab thinks of its purpose as solving these physical problems in the world, in our part of the world, and being really the only big homegrown tech company from our region. And so we think that any of those physical problems are a purpose, which means that COVID's actually quite scary for us because you see a lot of problems and people get very eager to like try to throw ourselves at a lot of problems. And we almost have to hold back and say, wait, that's not a really smart play because of X. So we've kind of got the reverse, kind of hold ourselves back a little bit and kind of take stock a little bit more. We've had this whole thing has really seen us create almost way too many physical world problems fixes in a very short, hacky sort of way. In the last 2 months, we kind of counted and we're like, this is too much. It's in 3 digits, right? So, and each country had their own way of doing it because we had to optimize for speed. So right now we're kind of, okay, we've had 3 months of this in some countries, and what makes the most sense for us going forward? Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's really fascinating. We've had a really good question actually in from the audience that I think builds on that, which we're going to answer live right now. The gentleman asking it, Simon Clough, has asked, to what extent, and he's put this to Akira, but I think it's very relevant to Sulin and all of the panelists actually, is to what extent is fulfilling brand purpose a luxury when we have a really big job to do to just get the world back to normal, i.e. operating core business safely, getting the economy moving again, protecting health and well-being of our customers and teams? Is it just about getting our house in order first before going back to a more purpose-led approach? Akira, what's your perspective on that?
Well, I think it depends on how you define purpose. I mean, is it just this grand vision thing that guides the Northern Star, that guides it, or is it something that we do on a day-to-day purpose? Because purpose essentially is what we do, and that defines us. It's also about how we prioritize our activities. So if we are a struggling company, we have loads of problems to deal with, then that's also part of the purpose of who we are, and we have to deal with that. So it's not either this or that. It's really everything put together that makes us who we are.
Karen, you're nodding very vigorously. I'm assuming you're in deep agreement.
I'm in deep agreement with Akira, absolutely. And it is how you define purpose. If it is inherently defined as the difference you make in the world, the difference you make in the lives of your end users, it should be part and parcel of your everyday. If it's viewed, and this alternative model is not wrong, it's just different. If purpose is viewed as something separate, as a nice to have once everything else is covered, like if people view CSR giving as something they have to turn off when times are tough and finances need to be locked down, it's just a different model. If you, and those tough choices to make. But if you view purpose as part and parcel of how you position yourself every day, how you go about doing what you do to have X impact on people's lives, you can't separate it.
What's your perspective, Damian?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think it's a really good question. There's a reality check here, which is, in the context of COVID-19, there are some winners, but there are mainly losers. And when I'm talking about from a business perspective, and there are a lot of businesses that are extremely distressed. That is a reality that we have. So the ability of those businesses to act on their purpose and engage in a positive way with community and contribute to the community is limited. So what you get into there are some of the difficult trade-offs and tensions that businesses have, which are inevitably they need to face in some really difficult decisions around costs, and that often involves people. Now, purpose does not allow that organisation the flexibility to contribute in a positive way to community, but it does allow guidance around how they execute against some of those difficult decisions. So I think even in the context where you have extremely distressed businesses, purpose still has a significant role in making sure that execution of difficult decisions is delivered in a way that is humane and consistent with the organisation's purpose. On the flip side, you have some winners at the moment through COVID-19. Not many, but there are some. We all know they're well documented. They then have the opportunity to engage in a really, really positive way with communities and with individuals, and they can do that. And the way that they do it can either be in an obvious CSR way, or getting back to the subject that we've got today, they can do it in a way that's distinctive. And that means doing it in a way that's aligned with their purpose. So I think it really depends on context a lot here.
Thank you. I think you mentioned in your answer there, and actually it's sort of inherent in the question, this idea of trade-offs. So I'm going to come to you, Adam, and talk about that thorny challenge. How are you managing trade-offs at Ornua? You know, the safety of your people versus your continued ability to trade, the responsibility to your extended value chain as a partner with farmers and many more, versus responsibility to your shareholders and your staff in-house, or how are you just even managing customer needs versus customer wants? What's your sort of approach to that at the moment?
Yeah, sort of building on what Damian said, you know, there's no silver bullet here. There's no easy answer. It's been challenging for us, as it has been for, you know, many organizations. And for us, we're not a typical corporate. So we're a cooperative, which is effectively owned by the 14,000 dairy farming families of Ireland. So if we're not able to get products to market, it has a number of impacts. It's not impacting shareholders or investment funds. They're not the groups that are suffering. It will be Irish dairy farming families that are going to suffer. Additionally, we're a food manufacturer in a time of great need for food supply, and the increased pressure that's been placed on the food supply chain as a result of this has been a challenge for us. And finally, obviously, we have a duty of care to our employees to ensure that we're not going to put them in harm's way. So it's been a real significant challenge for us to try and balance these elements, and that's been the main focus for us on a daily basis for the organization.
Has that been a similar challenge for you, Sulin? I mean, you must have lots of different stakeholders that you're trying to manage at Grab, and not least sort of the different levels of employee within the organization as well.
I don't think our employees have been much of an issue, actually. For a weird thing, we just got our employee engagement score, and it's actually better than it's ever been. After people have sat 2.5 to actually 3 months without each other. So that's a weird learning in itself. So I don't think it's not that we're not worried about employees. I think we overcompensated, and therefore the employees are not the issue. For us, it's really balancing. It's really making a balancing act between what's the most important thing for us, right? And actually, surprisingly for us, the most important asset that we have to protect is it's not consumer trust as much. Consumers really look at Grab as a utility brand, and if we serve that utility really well, and if we don't really piss them off, they're kind of good. We're a good utility every day. I think for us, the asset that we have to work hardest to protect is our community. So we have drivers, we have delivery partners in 2 wheels, 4 wheels, 3 wheels, all different types of wheels. And we have hundreds of thousands of merchants in various countries. And they range from like a fishmonger up to a McDonald's, right? So protecting and making sure they survive, and also giving them advice about how to best work the platform. I think that's the most of the energy that we're putting into right now. And the government also wants us to do that. The governments in most countries are seeing a lot of physical pain in the world, and they need to find digital tools and they're not as far down the line in terms of thinking around digital tools, except for maybe Singapore. So we see a role as helping that community and helping some of the governments, local or federal, to actually fix some of these frictions with whatever tech we can cook up in a few weeks. Yeah.
Akira, I'll come back to you to talk a little bit about sort of executive committees and their sort of management and use of of purpose as a decision-making tool, as a way of doing what Damian was talking about earlier, that balancing of tough choices. What's your experience? I mean, it must be very difficult now within an airline with so many really, really hard trade-offs to make, to stay true to that purpose that you've been talking about. But you've talked very strongly about the need to do it. I mean, how has that played out within Japan Airlines in the past few weeks and months?
Well, with Japan Airlines, yes, we do talk a lot about purpose and trying to live up to our brand promise. But we don't use purpose alone as a tool. We have with Japan Airlines what we call a agile philosophy, which essentially is the shared value that we have. We all have a copy of the 125-page long agile philosophy booklet, which contains 40 articles, roughly half of which concerns how to behave as a responsible member of society, such as doing what is right as a human being. And whether we have doubt, whenever we face trade-offs, we refer to the agile philosophy for answers. And that helps us prioritize on things that we think is more important. And that has been very helpful. So purpose is very much like intent. It's just like what was mentioned earlier on, CSR is not something you put on and off. You need to have the intent to do that. But very often this is also guided by shared values amongst all employees within the organization. And that has been helpful to as well.
That's really interesting. I mean, I guess it's a similar situation for you, Karen, in a lot of ways, where you're looking at how to manage multiple different stakeholders, both internally and externally. I mean, how have you used your purpose to engage with people under pressure, like your retail partners, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key is knowing who you are and staying true to who you are and being there. And so we've, a lot of our most important retail partners have the infrastructure to stay strong right now. The Targets and the Amazons of the world, they're relatively speaking thriving in this economy, in this environment, and we're there with them. We've had a direct-to-consumer channel through our website for quite some time now, and we're finding that it's something that is being linked to by affiliate marketers who would normally default to the Amazons of the world for their links, are now broadening their links and turning to alternative sources. And we've been the beneficiaries of that as well. So I think as long as we can stay true to who we are, like deliver on the level of trust that we've come to, have people assume about us, we're able to deliver that through our traditional channels, assuming they're up and running, and fortunately most of them are. Others have become more active than ever, like grocery stores as essential businesses. That's a channel we're always in and we're always doing well in, but it's just interesting to see things really heat up in arenas where people have fewer options and then they rely on those few options more heavily. So between direct to consumer, the activation of channels that are essential, as well as the stalwart partners, we try to be ourselves and as reliable as ever. So far so good, and we're hopefully not disappointing expectations.
I think we've talked a lot about sort of what we've all done in the now and sort of the recent weeks to manage the situation as it's evolved. But I think increasingly we're being asked by clients and actually by the audience to look to the future and to look to what we do next and when we do it. So I'm going to come back to that communications challenge we talked about at the beginning. And I'm just going to ask a couple of questions about when to dial up different parts of the message. Because I think a lot of brands are struggling with that right now. When do I move from this entirely empathetic perspective that perhaps isn't as distinct as it could be because it's been rushed to market? How do I kind of regain ground? How do I do the right thing and when? Damian, what's your perspective on this? Where do brands need to adjust, and when do brands need to adjust that graphic equalizer?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question around when do you dial up different parts of the message. That said, I think it's a false question, in that it suggests that there's a time for empathy and then there's a time for action. And I think now, but I think in general, like, let's forget COVID-19 for a second. I think purpose is about the soul of the organization. And as a consequence of that, it's about how the organization behaves and how the organization engages with different stakeholders. the key thing here is about behavior and actions. And I think it's key that now during COVID-19 that organizations behave and act in the right way. Regardless of COVID-19, it's key that organizations behave and act in the right way. There is also, of course, a time for communication, and that should be empathetic. But I don't think there's an order of events here. I think the organisation should first act. I think actions are the things that people want to see. I think they're the things that cut through. And I think the organisations should communicate with empathy with regards to those actions. But I don't think there's a sort of sequencing of events here.
Yeah.
Interesting. Adam, what's your perspective? I mean, there's the practical point of brand comms, I guess, versus direct response comms that I guess I'm getting at with the question a little bit. What's your perspective about when that tap goes back on? Are you expecting to not have too much direct response for the rest of the year? Are you looking at actually thinking more about just more brand communications as the default?
Yeah, I'd be in a similar place to Damian, to be honest with you. I do think the graphic equalizer is a great analogy on how to view, how you balance it, balance the tone in your comms and, what actions that you choose. I'd be in a similar place of challenging the assumption of the question for two reasons. First of all, it is possible to dial up emotion, and the question supposes you can't do it distinctively, but it needs to be done in a way that's connected to your brand and not in some artificial way, but in how people actually perceive your brand. And then it will land genuinely and authentically with those consumers. And brands have done this successfully for decades in many different categories. Additionally, I would also say that, all the guidance that you're reading now is saying when this event ends, we're going to be entering another significant one, a global recession. And any of the evidence that I've seen, because we're all in similar roles, probably looking at, right, how are we going to prepare for the second thing coming? A lot of the guidance that I've read that says brands that successfully navigated the last recessionary period did that because they dialed up the emotional connection to their brand in a way that was genuine and authentic with consumers, and therefore they performed better over that recessionary period. So I would say that will remain important in communications right now and going forward into the next event. Thank
you. I think there's a lot of nodding going on, so I'm going to come to you next, Sulin. What's your perspective on this? Is it that false choice? Is it actually exactly as David?
Yeah, false choice. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everybody else. It's a false choice, right? So it assumes that there is a sequencing or a phasing. And for me, I don't even think you need to go with you should even do brand comms without having something to say, some action. So I even think that even if you can't be distinctive, if you can be useful, if you can be extraordinarily useful, boringly useful, in a time of high stress and high distress, that's not a shameful place to be. If I take trust, distinctiveness and purpose, I would say that you'd have to have trust. And trust can come from expertise. Trust can come from being a really good, tool. It would be better if it was purpose that was built before a crisis, but building a purpose during a crisis doesn't make sense. And I think distinctiveness is great, but I think sincerity and authenticity is much more important. Like if you think about people that you really remember during this time, right? Did they do things that were super different or super sexy or super, or were you just affected by their genuine sincerity? And I think sincerity has a win over distinctiveness. Both are great, but I would actually say that you don't need it to do good. You don't need it to make a difference. You don't need it to build a brand.
That's a really good answer. Thank you. I think, Karen, I'm coming to you next because you operate in some interesting categories where utility is at the forefront, right, of how your products bring value to people day to day. But you're also trying to elevate that. So what's your perspective on what Sulin's just said?
I think it's very interesting, and I agree with the philosophy completely. We make over 2,000 products, and they do what they're supposed to do very, very well. They often surprise, delight, and exceed expectations. What we've had to do all along is strive to connect the dots across the parts and pieces of our portfolio. There might be a half a dozen tools from us in people's homes that they love, but they don't necessarily inherently connect the brand to each of those experiences. So how do we make people aware of the choices that they make, especially when there's a commodification for everything, for most brands who are in our space who aren't ours, are really not as differentiated as far as a product experience. So how do we get that across, our differentiation, the difference that we make in the world, and the difference that that product will make in people's lives, and then allow the sum total of all the parts and pieces of our brand that people have in their lives add up to a larger total. And then how do we take that and ladder it up to what our brand stands for, which is why, as we said before, we are about making the everyday better. And then when people think down to those individual moments in their day where there might be delight from a cleaning product or from an omelet turner that helps your breakfast turn out perfect, or a peeler or a grater, they say, oh, this is delightful. And this is the brand that is the through line through it all. As I was saying before, the everyday has changed so radically in this time that we're in, that those moments of delight are more important than ever, and we're learning more appreciated than ever. And we're in turn trying to reframe it as, cooking isn't just about something you do when you get home quickly, or something you do for a dinner party when people come over. These days, it's about having a sense of accomplishment. It's about providing and nourishing yourself and your family, and then nurturing on an emotional level. So we've really reframed all of our categories in the near term with a different level of meaning, which gets back to, interestingly, to the original question with this graphic equalizer metaphor between empathy, heritage, humanity, between trust and purpose, and distinctiveness. It's sort of like, it's a false choice in that they're not levers that you pull that are independent of one another. They're things that have to be built into who you are and addressed seamlessly. So yes, when you're selling something, although that is a relative thing these days, but if you have something like a massive promotion, how do you do that in a way that's sensitive and true to who you are, in a way that doesn't feel like you're just trying to make money from a sale, but actually help people improve the new everyday of their lives? So it's less of a series of silos and more of a seamless transition, being the brand being true to itself and toggling at the right moment with the right level of sensitivity. So it is important to acknowledge those levers, but it's vital that they're seen as something you can flow seamlessly throughout. So it doesn't feel like you're shifting modes. Heritage is important, it's part of who you are, but this isn't the moment to go into an anthem about your history in and of itself. And this is our 30th year, and we've changed our plans around that kind of celebrating 3 decades of better. That would be too self-serving at this point, but we are continuing to redefine what better means in this new everyday. And if later in the year, or I feel like 2020 is probably going to be a do-over, so everything that was meant to be done, including the Olympics, this year will be pushed into next year. We'll get a do-over in 2021. We'll just round it up, and it's just, if you're going to pull the heritage lever, it should be in the service of helping people right now. It shouldn't be an end in and of itself. The worst thing a brand can do is seem naive, tone deaf, self-serving, or out of touch with everyone's everyday. And one of the elegant things about this moment is no one, or most people, are not sitting in a situation that is, you're not allowed to have blinders on. And so if you can't have that in your everyday, the brand should be sensitive to that as well and communicate as such.
Damian, I'm going to come to you because it feels like that was quite a good question to ask in terms of the response there, but also it's sort of it's unpicked a couple of bits and pieces around how teams are working and about how flexible and symbiotic people are going to have to be in terms of balancing all these different elements and making those kind of choices. How are you kind of viewing this for clients? Is this something that you're helping clients scenario plan at the moment? Is it something where you can give a right answer, or is it multiple answers that you're trying to provide for them?
I think context is everything. I think that's the first thing. I think clients are invariably in very different places and have different tensions on them. One of the things we see when we work with clients are, we're having a conversation right now about how to build trust and make purpose distinctive. But one of the things we see with clients are sometimes they need to take a couple of steps back. And a couple of steps back are, first of all, they need to sharpen up the purpose to make sure that the purpose is meaningful and does serve the different interest groups of a variety of stakeholders. But the second thing, which I think is really important, where organizations struggle, is the middle bit, which is once you have a purpose that's meaningful, how do you communicate it and embed it throughout the organization so the different constituent parts of the organization really feel it, really understand it, and really start to live it? And where you have inconsistent communication, where you have bad decision making, which we've talked about a little bit in this session, it's actually as a consequence that the purpose is either not well defined or not well understood and embedded throughout the organization. So until you've got your house in order with regards to those two things, very difficult actually to make sure that you're going to have a purpose that's going to build trust and is going to be distinctive, because you have to have it as a thread that runs right through the organization. That's
a really good answer. I guess it brings me to a question we've actually had from the audience, from Campbell McPherson, who goes on to say, culture is the missing central piece to all of this. Actually, the only way to deliver the purpose-led customer experience that you want is to ensure your culture is fully aligned to purpose. So have you got any examples as a panel? I'll come to you first, Damian, if you don't mind, but have you got any specific examples of people who focused on making sure they get that culture right first?
Yeah, I do. And I think the other, just before I sort of share a couple of examples, I think the other important factor involved in this is you have purpose, you have values as an organization, you have a vision, you have a mission. Really, the challenge is for organizations is how do you create a corporate narrative that ties all of these different constituent parts together in a way that people understand? Because I think from an employee perspective, it's very confusing. There's lots of different messages, different points of communication within every organization. And actually, there's limited bandwidth that an employee has to piece them all together. It's not really their job. So I think that thought around how do you tie together a coherent corporate narrative that includes purpose in a way that employees understand, in a way that employees start to own, and in a way that employees start to act on is one of the key things. There are a lot of organizations that have done wonderful jobs on it. We have been, in the past, fortunate enough to partner with Disney in helping them connect different parts of their constituent narrative together so that actually what is quite a diversified organization together as one around one purpose. But I'm sure the panel have got other examples I want to share.
Akira, do you have any that you immediately come across?
Yeah, I do agree that, having that shared sense of purpose is very important. But I think one thing that many organizations are struggling is speed. I mean, you have this idea of this purpose of what you want to become, and all your employees are on the same page, want to become that, but you don't have the organizational capabilities to actually make that happen. It becomes a problem. So it's equally important that it's back to what was mentioned earlier about the different phases you have, that I agree that it has to be seamless, but in order to really be effective in this new world, and I know many people say that, there won't be a new world, it's just something that people have conjured up and make up to believe that it's going to be a totally different world. But at least in my industry, we do can very easily paint a scenario of a very different travel space after COVID-19. So unless you are a super agile company, you have to really think ahead and then work backwards to see how you can really prepare yourselves. And I like what was mentioned earlier about sincerity, about being authentic. But if you're really sincere and authentic, then you really think ahead, think of what would happen should this become our future, and then work backwards and be prepared.
Thank you very much for that. I think, Karen, you're nodding away. Do you have examples of your own where you can say, actually, the culture is clearly at the forefront of the mind of this business and they're putting it forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, your internal audiences are primary. If you don't have empowered brand stewards, you're not going to be able to get anything off the ground, and you're not going to be able to radiate that authenticity, that seamless brand presentation and experience, that product or service experience, let alone communications. It's absolutely key. And even though the consumer is at the end of everything that that we do, we start with the internal audiences and help them feel empowered and indoctrinated. Culture and so many different parts and pieces of corporate and brand strategy are being put to the test more than ever in this virtual working situation. It's like, while we are physically apart, you need to be very clear about what you're doing together. While we're physically apart, virtually connected, we have to be very clear, crystal clear about what we're accomplishing together. So I'm always so fascinated, you know, you look on social media and people are like, I'm bored during quarantine. It's like, oh my God, like it's been 3 times as busy as usual, you know? I think the fact that there's no commute, so you're just here in your home and your office. But you know, there's just, from a communication standpoint, my teams have been spinning more than ever. You know, everything that we planned months ahead had to be completely redone. So many new pieces of communication had to be done, not to mention stepping back and strategically reframing everything through the lens of now and that sensitivity. So from a culture standpoint, how we behave as an organization, and for OXO, that's both within our physical and virtual walls as a brand, but also within our larger organization. We're part of a parent company called Helen of Troy that's done a ton of culture work to unify a culture across that entire organization. And things like, you know, assuming positive intent, and things like being fully present, you know, key pillars of that culture, which was so diligently rolled out and with so much care throughout the organization, are really top of mind these days, and are like really ports in a storm that you can go to remind yourself that you really are together in this, and that these things that might have felt like theory as they were being rolled out are now being put to the test in practice under very unusual and very trying circumstances. You know, the first few days, if not first few weeks, felt a bit like triage. I hate to use that word against the backdrop of what we're going through, but, you know, organizational triage as far as learning a new way of working. But once we got into a rhythm, which happened quite quickly, and once we really had a clear focus on how the world has changed, and granted that was starting to change further every day, certainly every week, but once we got into that groove, and once we had those cultural pillars to lean on, they became indispensable to do what we do every day, both as a functional organization, but even more importantly, as a brand that needs to radiate a very specific tone and point of view in the world, and hopefully make a difference. Going back to the core idea of this talk about purpose, really make a difference in people's everyday lives.
Yeah, Adam, Sulin, I'll come to you in order. It feels like you've both got kind of extended supply chains in a lot of ways, and extended responsibilities out from your own employees. How are you managing that cultural piece when it comes to working with your kind of your supply chain of partners? Adam, let's start with you.
Yeah, I just might even build on the points that the folks raised there previously. I was going to jump in. Some really interesting themes come through the discussion. What Karen raised in relation to, you know, the fact that this is completely uncharted territory for everyone. And typically for marketeers, you get a lot of blue personality types in that space that go to, right, you know, how do you manage this? What's happened in the past? There is no playbook for it. And similar to what Akira raised around the pace of change. And I think that's placed a lot of challenge for organizations. And I think that's where purpose and values have become even more important, because you don't have the time to research stuff, and you don't have the time to look back at how things were managed in the past. So values becoming even more important. But in answer to your question that you asked me in relation to supply chain, yeah, that's been a huge issue for us, and you've touched on it with some. Damian would have mentioned it in relation to some other industries where, you know, particularly in the retailing environment, that's our core customer group, and you know, we have made significant changes in our supply chain to ensure that we can meet the demand in our core markets around our product. We've been careful in terms of how we've communicated around the product during that time period, with the example that I mentioned previously, and we've had to work extremely closely with our suppliers to ensure that we're maximizing, you know, to be very technical, the milk throughput from the island of Ireland, because we're effectively responsible for selling half of it, and we're getting into peak milk season. So we're working extremely closely with them to ensure that we can make those purchases to effectively deliver value back to those farming families, because we're in an unusual situation where our suppliers effectively own the company. So it's been a challenging task trying to maintain that supply through to our retail customers, but we've made significant changes to ensure that happens.
Sulin, how are you managing the sort of extended culture piece with Grab and all of your supporting audiences?
Difficult already in a normal year. If you imagine the face of Grab for most people isn't a Grab employee, except for the app experience, that's entirely controllable by Grab. Every other bit of the experience is a driver, a delivery partner. They own their own vehicles. They clean their own vehicles. They manage their own restaurants. They do the quality of food, right? So so all of that piece is already quite hard to manage a certain level of quality even before all this. I guess the important thing is to set the marketplace correct. So the base thing is to make sure the incentives in the marketplace are healthy, that encourage customer positive behavior. Anything above that is really how much would they go above and beyond because they feel proud of being part of the Grab community. And that's really just about, again, being, humanly treating people right. And that's always going to be very, very difficult anyway, because there's so many diverse people with, all different tastes of what they think, right treatment should be. But it's even more difficult right now when all of them feel that their businesses, their income, their livelihoods are being crushed. So I think we think about that every single day. I think our internal moral compass is like, do the right thing and hope people understand. And I don't think that there is much more that we can do besides that. The hygiene stuff, we can control that. We can make sure that the app checks temperature controls. We can build the tech in, but at the end of the day, the experience is delivered well if the humans delivering it, even under duress, feel that they have the duty to do that. And so that's the philosophy we're taking. I guess the other piece is how much you invest in making sure they keep happy versus conserving cash. And for us, that's a simpler decision than most people think. For us, it's not a social purpose only. Yes, the social purpose is building wealth at the bottom of the pyramid, right? Solving problems in the physical world. But they are our biggest competitive company advantage. This network effect that was built over 8 years and spent most of the investor money doing is that thing that is the most valuable thing. They are not hired by us, they're not our staff, but they are our most valuable asset. And we have not just a social duty to help them weather the storm and spend money on that. We have an economic advance. We have an economic incentive to do whatever is necessary to protect that. Without that community, there is no network effect. There is no business, and there is no path to profit in the long run anyway. So it's not as trade-offy as it might seem, because the purpose is aligned to the things you have to do the right thing. Yeah.
Which is sort of the point of having a good purpose, really, is making it connect up to your entire business in the right way. I think what I find really interesting about this whole discussion, and thank you so much to all of you. I'm just going to wrap up with a few comments. It's been a fascinating debate and a really, really good conversation. So it's ticked all the boxes from our perspective. It feels very much like there are some really clear points to kind of return to. And I'm going to return to sort of the points that Damian made actually at the beginning in his little presentation, this idea of continuity and building on your brand, your strategy and your existing strengths. It's come across in everything we've talked about that actually it isn't really a sort of a balancing an act or a trade-off. It's a symbiosis between the sort of elements that we've talked about, distinctiveness, trust and purpose, and that actually using your distinctive assets to embed your purpose and create deeper trust. They're just natural sort of interrelated behaviors here. And actually, there's a call to action for brands who perhaps have rushed to press the communications button during the last few weeks of the crisis and the last couple of months to reconsider how they go back out to market now with a more considered approach. I really loved your comment earlier, Sulin, about having that sort of rapid iteration of multiple different tools and techniques and approaches to solving issues within the crisis. And then actually now you've had to step back as a business and say, look, we've got hundreds of these and we can't prioritize all of them and we can't deliver them all to the relevant level and ability that we want to. So in fact, we've just got to step back and prioritize the things that do connect with what we're all about, that do connect with our audiences in the right way, that do the job of building the culture amongst our internal employees and with our partners. I think the other piece that's come across is this sense that there isn't an exact science to this. There isn't a right answer. There isn't a one size fits all for everybody. And there never really is with this sort of thing, but it's even more distinct that that's the case these days. And that actually scenario planning and working to manage through potential challenges that you have as a business, doing that hard work to understand what you'll do in certain contexts, it has never been more important. And that some of the work that people are doing around that will actually stand them in good stead for the future. I think there's also been a great kind of discussion around sincerity and authenticity, and I've loved Karen's points and Adam's points about this, and Akira's as well, actually, where you're starting to talk about this need to be sincere, authentic, to have something that is purposeful, and actually Sulin's point about not trying to develop a purpose if it doesn't already exist in the organization as something that you're using. Not trying to use this time to do that is really valuable. I think there's a lot to be said for being useful right now. And we ourselves are talking about this need to be, to focus on utility, to focus on specificity, and to focus on what we stand for, which is clarity. And I think that then this other point that's tied up in this, which is a focus on tangibility, to Damian's point. If you're making choices about what to do next, make it about the actions you're taking rather than the communications that you're putting out to market, and be really, really kind of cognizant of being consistent in those choices. Don't make the contradictions that we've seen in certain situations, and we've had actually questions from the audience on that basis as well. And then the final piece really is to be proactive. Get control of your corporate narrative. Have a think about how it's working down through the business to your internal stakeholders, and then work out how that corporate narrative is being played out to all of your external stakeholders, both those that you understood that you had a responsibility to before the crisis, but increasingly those that you also have a responsibility to as a result of the crisis. I'm really grateful to all five of you for what I think has been a fantastic conversation. I will remind everybody who's attending, you can find out more about Clear Conversations on the links that you'll find in the chat. That's clearstructure.com/the-new-normal, or you can follow us on LinkedIn. Please do that at Clare MNC Saatchi to find out more about future conversations. You will be not surprised to hear that we'll be doing something on brand experience in the very near future, and we'll also be doing something on that corporate narrative point that Damian raised earlier. So please do check back, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you to all the panelists, and see you soon.